Okay, so October 31st, on this day, three important architects were born. Charles Moore and Richard Morris Hunt and Zaha Hadid. I will begin to talk a little bit about Charles Moore, and then I will talk about Richard Morris Hunt, and then in the end, with a much ampler presentation, Zaha Hadid. Initially, I thought of talking just about Zaha Hadid, but because I would like to be fair, I thought that it's important to also talk a little bit about these two other architects, Charles Moore and Richard Morris Hunt, both North Americans. So Charles Willard Moore, you see, was born on October 31st in 1925, was an American architect, educator, writer, fellow of the American Institute of Architects, and winner of the AIA, the American Institute of Architecture Gold Medal in 1991. He is often, sorry for the citation needed, this is from Wikipedia, labeled as the father of postmodernism. His work as an educator was important to a generation of American architects who read his books or studied with him at one of the several universities where he taught. Now, the thing is, I don't know exactly why he's called the so-called father of postmodernism, but his work, you know, in the 60s was not postmodern and was, in a strange way, perhaps, even the work, the later work, was what I might call some kind of a postmodern deconstruction, which is, I just had this idea while I was preparing this short presentation, and it should have been larger, but because we have three celebrations today and it's the colossal figure of Zaha Hadid, I will just have a short presentation about him. But it will be, I hope, you know, a first step towards addressing the work of this important architect. So, and I will try to explain why I thought of maybe I'm not yet totally sure to describe his work as some kind of a postmodern deconstruction. Patrick Schumacher, who is running now the Zaha Hadid office, said that there were two transitional periods between modernism and parametricism, and these two were postmodernism and deconstruction. But somehow, in the case of Charles Willard Moore, at least in some works, and I regret I don't have more examples here, maybe we can talk a little bit about a possible postmodern deconstruction. But let's move forward. This was the man, and he was indeed important, you know, in the in the fourth quarter of the 20th century. And while I dislike almost vehemently postmodernism in general, I think his work is a little more subtle. Unfortunately, towards the end, yes, he became maybe too explicitly so-called postmodern, but in the period preceding the late 70s, I think he did some works which were rather modern, not postmodern, but with a fragmentarism that made me think somehow of anticipating even perhaps deconstruction without the radicalism of deconstruction. You see, I wrote here for myself, you know, thinking aloud, postmodern deconstructivism with a question mark. This is a portrait of him that was published on Architectural Review, and some drawings by Charles Moore. Somehow, you know, they are playful, they are, you know, dreamlike, they are, you know, fantastic and, you know, a little bit humorous, but after dwelling a lot of time in the works of Zaha Hadid with her abstractions and her vectors and so on, somehow I like these drawings by Charles Moore. Not all works by him are passing easily the test of time, but some are, I think, interesting. And at the time when I was gathering these images, I even began to have a little bit of sympathy. I hope it's not a sign of degeneration, but a little bit of sympathy for that period of time when deconstruction, asserted itself. Now, you see, even here in this, I don't know who did this photograph. He is here, but you see here some kind of a fractal geometry, and on the right you see a model of one of his houses, which is fragmented and is not yet the deconstructivism of Frank Gehry's own house, but there is something there. He is fragmenting the monolith, and he was doing this earlier, 20 years earlier or so. Anyway, so now I just show some drawings of Charles Moore of various kinds. Even this, it's very, it's dreamlike. It's like a fairy tale drawing. And I think if architects assume again this fairy tale world, it might not be a bad thing, although of course there are risks of falling into what I call cultural infantilism. But he was not infantile. And you see here in this drawing, manual drawing with watercolors, I guess, or whatever. He was a cultured and willful architect who knew what he was doing. And you'll see his architecture. Too bad that, again, I only show early works by him, one or two works, not much. But this is, as I said, is an invitation to further study the work, not just of Charles Moore, but maybe also to reassess or to reconsider or to pay some attention to that phenomenon, because it was a phenomenon. I mean, it's very easy to dismiss the whole world during those years when postmodernism was ruling in architecture. But something must have had some validity. There was a reason why this happened. Again, I am, almost naturally an adversary of postmodernism, almost as a rule. But I think Charles Moore had something else in his architecture, and he's actually, in his early works, he's actually a modern with a taste for ambivalences, for fragmentation, and this, I think, is not a bad thing. I mean, like this, for example, this drawing shows a modern building. This is not a postmodern building, but you could say it has postmodern elements in the fact that it's problematizing the monolithical integrity or unity of the building. The problem was when the postmoderns borrowed, in a facile way, forms, shapes from the past, from history. That was a problem. But look at this plan here. I actually like it. It's fragmented. It's somehow organic, although the volumes themselves are rather prismatic, but their articulation is has a vibration. It's not static. It's dynamic. Yeah, this is the problem, and this is a big problem in postmodernism. this column, you know, this historicist column, which was borrowed, and there is a problem with this. This was a book that was published, you know, he was involved, Body, Memory, and Architecture. And, you know, somehow the very title is, I think, appealing, Body, Memory, and Architecture. He wrote it with that Mr. Bloomer and Charles Moore. But look at this drawing. This is a modern architecture. This is not postmodern architecture. It was not yet affected by the virus of historicism. On the other hand, he has these, you know, fantastic drawings. Anyway, Charles Moore, I think, I myself don't know enough about his works, but I think I feel tempted to study further his works. He worked together with other architects like this, Moore, Linden, Turnbull, and Whitaker, and they built the so-called the influential Sea Ranch in 1963. So this was, you know, a significant time before the arrival of postmodernism. It was a planned community in Sonoma County in California, and it's an interesting group of buildings. They belong together, but they also have their own individuality. So it's this equilibrium between the private and the public, which I think is positive in architecture. And as you can see at the buildings, these are modern. This is a modern. It's described as some kind of an utopian, you know, architecture. In a way, it is, in the sense that it is a cluster of individual houses brought together, and so there is this communal aspect, but they also could function as individual units. And I think this architecture is valid even today. If you would build something like this, you would not be, you know, out of touch with your time. I think this is a valid architecture, and this, I guess it is in the process of, or it was in the process of being, you know, rejuvenating the building, because this is a rendering with the interior of, I don't know exactly what happened to it. Maybe it's possible that in time, you know, since it was born, you know, almost 60 years ago, it got a little bit damaged. But we look at a building that is, I think, still freshly modern and convincingly modern. Unfortunately, later, Charles Moore became himself affected by, maybe on one hand, his own interest in, you know, fantastic imaginings, architectural imaginings, and also the imports from history through the, you know, fatal historicism that affected postmodernism. Here he is, you know, in this building that he designed, and I think there are interesting things here in this building, and particularly I would say this conjunction between individual units and collective spaces. And you know, the rooms seem to be quite pleasant. Now, of course, the setting is also very pleasant. But this is, again, is an architecture that I would say even today would be very valid. It's also true that at the end of the 60s, there was that idealism in the world, not just in the United States, also in Europe, mainly Western Europe, the protest of the young against war, against the obsession with money, against banks. There was the music of the 60s that had a lot of vitality. So it was a certain collectivism in the air, which is also expressed in the architecture of this cluster of buildings. And here you see the plan. There are the individual units, but there is also a sense of belonging together. And this is a positive thing. I have another image with a plan here. It's a little clearer. So Charles Moore was a skillful architect, and why exactly he's called the father of postmodernism, the way I think probably many fathers of postmodernism, maybe even mothers, I don't know, but I think these labels are dangerous, the father of modernism or the father of postmodernism. But things are not so linear and so simple and so, clearly cut from a unique cause. Anyway, so this is the Sea Ranch condominium that he designed with his partners in 1965. So, almost 60 years ago. Interesting things are here, wow. Look at this bedroom. There are spatial innovations, and yet historicism didn't affect his architecture, and that's why perhaps I like more these early works by Charles Moore. And the truth is, with all due respect for Zaha Hadid, who designed only one house, so-called family house, or that rich Russian man, she designed just one single house. Here we see something. I hope I'm not lowering my standards, but it's more humane. It's warmer. It's less as a manifesto, and it's more like a home. And in a very troubled world, as the world we are in, perhaps to be able to build a home and not just a house, doesn't matter how brilliant, is perhaps a good thing. So it's not yet deconstruction, but this fragmentation, where you have all kinds of spaces that assert their individuality, their uniqueness, is somehow pointing in that direction. Not in a radical way, but I think the tendency seems to be in that direction. It must be very pleasant to read. It's true. Anyway, also wood, which was rejected most of the time by deconstructivists. And here again, wood is acceptably put to work because it's not yet, displayed in a populist or pop way or historicist way, as it happened in postmodernism, unfortunately. Now, why exactly this is called utopian? It shouldn't be utopian at all. In fact, it should be very commonplace. It should be this kind of living where you have your own apartment or little house, but connected with other houses. I think this should be a modus vivendi that is very auspicious and favorable for anyone on this earth, actually. Anyway, now I show the faculty club at the University of California from 1968 in Santa Barbara. He did it with William Turnbull. And again, it's the same kind of architecture where you have various spaces, various units and connected, contributing to a whole. And this is in the context of a university. I don't know exactly what this club was about. Anyway, and the variety of spaces. There is clearly an interest in creating dynamic interiors. Maybe not very surprising, from the perspective of today, but still, I think one cannot deny, what is interesting about these spaces. And both inside and outside, the buildings have, this positive fragmentarism, as I call it. Yes, there are touches of, a little bit of pop. There is not everything is great, I think, but this is Charles Moore. This was Charles Moore. And here I only show these two examples of his architecture. I prefer the previous one, but it's still an architecture which I think cannot be, totally dismissed.